Judson's lips.
No, not me. Not me. I guess just to clarify, he can't read them, but he could send them to the other commissioners.
Right.
As a record. Yeah, just as a record, you know, right.
Yeah, he could give to Ms. Lenhoff, who could, you know, communicate as well.
Okay.
I would do with that what you would do with any correspondence that you receive from a member of the public.
Yeah.
Is that?
That is very helpful. And I think, yeah, I think that is probably not super helpful as far as what was desired, maybe, especially, yeah. So I think I will figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
And Commissioner Bogus, there was a on the action item tonight, the translation item, there was a sentence which I believe, due to an error in my office, didn't get included in, but I believe is now in the materials, but didn't get included in the edits, which, if it's helpful, I can come on at the start of this. Ms. Houck got called away on a family matter, but I could come on and explain the circumstance if that's helpful. Or Judson, I think you know the.
Yeah, I know, but I'm actually here as backup at this meeting, so I have to jump in and out to different meetings, so I can't guarantee I'll be here for that timing. So okay. I'd ask you to do it if that's okay.
I'd be glad to do that if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would prefer that. That'd be great. I think
it's a one sentence drop. It is, you know.
Which sentence was it?
It was in the third paragraph, at almost to the end, paragraph number 3, almost to the end, school-wide events. And there had been some amendments made, and our office somehow didn't get that. One is just a subordinate clause, and then there was a final sentence about submitting requests in advance. And those didn't somehow make the cut on it. So I can read those into the record. It doesn't affect, the committee can still act on it, and it can still go forward with whatever the recommendation is.
And is that what is available via board docs, or is that actually not what's on board docs?
It's not on board docs.
Okay.
So it'll be added to the amendments to the amended resolution that is on board docs.
Got you. Thank you for that clarity. Appreciate that.
Okay, we have interpretation today, so should I start with that?
Yes, please.
SFUSD will provide interpretation throughout today's board meeting. For Chinese interpretation, please call 1-484-854-3328 with the PIN 721-609-895. For Spanish interpretation, please call 1-319-382-9676 with the PIN 665-996-976. Can I please have that translated?
Buenas tardes. El Distrito Escolar Unificado de San Francisco ofrece sus servicios de interpretación en el idioma español. Si necesita interpretación por medio de Google Meet, por favor marque el siguiente número telefónico seguido de la clave de acceso. El número telefónico es 1-319-382-9676. Por favor marque la clave 665-996-976 seguido de la tecla numeral. Gracias. Cantonese interpreter, please. Thank you.
Thank you. 歡迎大家參加我哋今晚嘅教委會會議。三藩市聯合校區為我哋今晚嘅會議提供免費嘅廣東話傳譯服務。如果邊位需要我哋嘅傳譯服務，麻煩你致電去 Google Meet， 電話號碼係1-484-854-3328，然後請輸入密碼721-609-895井字。多謝你 ，Thank you。
Okay, so I think that was the end of the interpretation services. So let's call the meeting to order with our full committee here. And why don't we jump into our first item, which is an action item. And I believe Mr. O'Quinn will be starting that for us, or is there another staff?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's fine. We have, just with respect to the action item on board policy 5023, the translation and interpretation policy, I believe it was Commissioner Alexander had proposed an amendment or a number of amendments to this item, which were included in the version that's on board docs. And I believe due to an error in my office, in the final section of that, paragraph 3, regarding school-wide events, there was a small portion omitted that we wanted to clarify that is among the amendments in this. And what I thought, if it's okay, is I would read that paragraph. It's only 2 sentences in its entirety, so that you have the current amended version of that. That
Yeah.
paragraph says, 3, school-wide events. Schools are encouraged as a best practice to provide interpretation for school-wide events sponsored by the school or district, as well as meetings of the school site council. That clause, as well as meetings of the school site council, was inadvertently omitted. If 15% or more of the school population speaks a language other than English. And the second sentence, which was also inadvertently omitted by my office, is school staff should submit interpretation requests at least 72 hours prior to the scheduled meeting. So with those changes, that is the currently amended policy that is before the committee.
Thank you. Could you or Commissioner Alexander maybe just speak a little bit about what those 2 sentences do to kind of change the policy itself, just since it is different? I know we read it and it's self-explanatory, but if you could kind of, summarize how it's different from what's reflected on board docs.
Why don't I try, and then I can let Commissioner Alexander correct me. The first change, which is a clause following the general provision, is that schools are encouraged to provide an interpretation at school-wide events sponsored by the school or district. And the addition is, as well as meetings of the school site council, just to make clear that SSC meetings, school site council meetings, are among the meetings that, as a best practice, there should be interpretation. And then the final sentence is simply a logistical one. School staff should submit interpretation requests at least 72 hours prior to the scheduled meeting, simply to enable that to happen. Commissioner Alexander, I will defer to the author on that.
That was an expert summary, in my opinion. Chair Bogus, did you want me to speak to all the amendments in general, or just that one?
I don't know if you wanted to talk to the resolution as a whole, or anything kind of in addition to the amendments to kind of capture it all, or I don't know if staff wants to do that before we kind of move forward.
Yeah, I'm happy to explain kind of the origins of this. So as my colleagues know, I was chair of this committee last year, and we actually held a number of discussion items about interpretation and translation practices in the district in response to parent requests. And we discovered that, a lot of things are going really well. I think our district makes a really strong commitment to provide translation and interpretation and ensure language justice and language access for all families. And, I would dare say we do better than most school districts in this respect, and we spend a lot of resources on it for good reason. We also noticed that there were some gaps, and to be honest, the majority of the gaps were more so gaps in communication or knowledge than as opposed to gaps in policy. In other words, we had policies in place that maybe people just everyone wasn't aware of. Maybe parents weren't always aware of their rights in certain circumstances, or maybe school staff weren't aware. And so one thing that came out of that discussion was, and this was at the legal office's suggestion, which I thought was a great one, was that we codify our existing policies, because we didn't actually have a board policy, although we had things written in various places. So the first version of this policy that was introduced for first reading and is reflected on this agenda item is actually just the reflection of what already exists, right? In terms of its current practice, and we're just kind of, the proposal is to codify it as a board policy. Then there were some other issues that did come up, again, that were relatively minor, I would say, but were important. And those issues, I agree that I would then propose some amendments to the policy to reflect those suggestions. And this was all covered in a rules committee. I believe it was the December rules committee. We had an excellent presentation from staff where these specific changes were all analyzed by the staff in terms of what was happening, what wasn't happening, what was possible, what was not possible. There was some financial analysis, and I know Chief Lau Smith has done some additional financial analysis, which she could share probably as well. So then that's where these amendments came from. So the first one is the one in the section on translation requirements in general, is basically about IEP meetings. Something that came up was that it's really important for parents and guardians to receive written materials in advance of meetings so they can review them, especially when you're talking about a complex document like a IEP assessment, for example, or other items like that are complex and require time to digest. Now that logistically is really challenging because of the timeline of how IEPs work, how items the assessment gets done. There's a particular legal timeline that we have to be following, and then so this is actually a tough turnaround. So we actually didn't make it an absolute requirement, but we said every effort should be made to provide those in advance. So that's the first proposed amendment. The second one under parent meetings is reflecting, this was another thing that came up from parents, that when, interpretation could be either simultaneous or consecutive. When it's consecutive, it takes twice as long. So sometimes they were being rushed through meetings because the meeting maybe was scheduled for 45 minutes or an hour. There was a typical English only meeting, but then with translation, they were still only being allotted 45 minutes or an hour. So this is just a reminder that best practice would be to extend the time of the meeting to allow, if interpretation is going to be consecutive. The third one is talking about board committee meetings, just adding that, and this is current practice actually, that we make every effort to honor requests submitted after 72 hours. Just reflecting that meeting agendas usually don't get posted before 72 hours. So if somebody wants to come to a committee meeting and wants interpretation, if they request it more sooner to the meeting than that, then we'll make every effort to provide it. The fourth one was the school site council one that Council Quinn summarized very well already. And the fourth one is just reflecting, this actually is pretty much a current practice anyway already also, which is that at district-wide events, it's standard practice to provide interpretation in Cantonese and Spanish because more than 15% of our families speak those languages. And then if it's another language, families simply have to request it, ideally, again, 72 hours or more in advance, and we will provide it. And the 72-hour requirement, just so everyone knows, is because we have to secure qualified translators and interpreters, and it often is difficult, interpreters for language. It's often difficult to do that. So, so that's why we didn't put in an absolute guarantee of anything in less than 72 hours. But I want to say Chief Lau Smith and the interpretation team does heroic work, and often they do provide interpretation with less than 72 hours notice. So those are the proposed changes to the policy, and I thank my colleagues for their consideration.
Commissioner Lamb, Vice President Lamb.
I had more of a comment and question, Chair Bogus. I don't know if you want to wait to open for dialogue or public comment, but I just
if it's a clarifying comment, then maybe yes. If not, I can wait until we get to public comment. If that's all the presentation we have, I don't know if there's any more presentation. I don't think there is. Okay, yeah, why don't we go to public comment and then we'll come back to you, Vice President Lamb, and we'll kind of move forward there. Okay, and so with that, why don't we go to public comment and we will give a minute for each of our commenters.
Okay, if you'd like to speak to this item, can you please raise your hand and can I have that interpreted, please?
Buenas tardes, por favor levante su mano si desea añadir un comentario público. Gracias.
而家係我哋公眾發表意見嘅時段，麻煩你如果想發言嘅話，先撳舉手鍵。多謝你 ，Thank you。
Okay, seeing two, Commissioner. Michelle?
Thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon, commissioners and staff. This is Michelle Jacques-Menegas, the coordinator for the Parent Advisory Council to the San Francisco Board of Ed. And I want to really appreciate the board's efforts both to codify current practices. I do think that's an important thing to do. And I also would like to support the amended resolution that Commissioner Alexander has put forward. As he mentioned, this is an issue of language access and language justice and equity. And this resolution as amended is especially helpful in supporting the full inclusion of parent participation at both school site and district level for families. So really appreciate everything that the district does to make sure that we have language access for our families. Thank you very much.
Marcella? Marcella? You need to unmute yourself. Marcella? Okay, the next one is Miriam. Miriam?
Sí, buenas tardes.
Yes.
Mire, mi nombre es Miriam Carreño y yo lo que quería más que nada es un comentario y mire que yo tengo una hija en Lowell High School y estoy aquí para apoyar las enmiendas presentadas por el comisionado Matt Alexander. Mi hija tiene un IP y muchas veces no me traducen bien las juntas y mucho menos me mandan documentos traducidos a tiempo. Entonces sabemos muchos padres que no hablamos el inglés y merecemos mejores servicios para poder estar más involucrados en la educación.
Yes. My name is Miriam Cerdeño, and I have a daughter who has an IEP, and I'm here to support Commissioner Alexander's amendments. We often don't get documents translated ahead of time for these IEPs, and we don't get good translation for the IEPs, and we really need that in order to be involved in our children's education.
Melissa? Melissa?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, one moment. Hi, my name is Melissa Stevens, and I wanted to say that I support the resolution and the amendments presented by Commissioner Alexander. Thank you.
I think that's it, Commissioner.
Thank you so much. And now let's go to comments from commissioners, and we'll start with Vice President Lamb.
Thank you. And thank you to Commissioner Alexander and the staff for working on this. This is such an important resolution, in particular when we're talking about building more inclusive school environments and overall how we're communicating with our families, particularly our monolingual or limited English proficient families. So just wanted to extend my support and appreciation for the work that's gone into it. I did have a follow-up question around, and it's not necessarily for the policy team, but maybe as it advances, I believe it's also scheduled to moved to budget and business services as well for this particular resolution. And just to be able to, raise a question to staff as they do some of this preparation for budget and business services, like to understand a little bit more background around how we evaluate the various interpretation services. Either we have outside contractors as well as the team here, and just and wanted to again thank the interpretation team for the massive volumes of work that happens. We, at minimum translate materials that go out in 5 languages, and at the same time just wanting to understand kind of how the evaluation and processes and also recognizing how important the in translation of IEPs, that is time and time again, when I've spoken with families and families I used to work with directly, was just how important that accessible information is so that they can feel informed in their child's development, in their child's education, and really feel like they are an active participant for decisions that are being made collectively with their child. So I just wanted to just flag that for the evaluation piece, because it does, I'm curious around the budget and fiscal implications there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Lamb. Yeah, I think I want to say I support the policy changes and the amendments, and I think they are in the right direction. But I think with Vice President Lamb, I'm really curious about kind of how we evaluate how we're kind of living up to this policy and really fulfilling it. And I'm interested in kind of the amount of money that we spend on these services, what we would actually versus what we project we would need to kind of fully implement this, kind of based on the information we have on these populations, and are we kind of using those numbers to kind of balance those things out, if that makes sense? Because I guess for me, I appreciate the intention, and I think it's how do we make it into something that is a reality for families and are easily accessible, especially at an IEP level, which I imagine are some of the more difficult places for families to get access to support they need, depending on their school side and how well equipped it is to support them directly. And so I guess I'm just curious if staff has thoughts about kind of how we address that traditionally, or is that something that typically like kind of falls outside of like the guise of kind of what we would do kind of in this moment?
Commissioner Alexander, did you want me to try to respond to those questions?
I would love that. And I would also, if I can just preface this by saying, I think Chief Lousmith has done some excellent analysis. We actually looked at some of the finances at the December rules meeting, and part of their presentation was included that, and then she's done some additional analysis, both of the contracting that we currently do, and has a very clear. I had asked for a breakdown of it, and she provided a really clear explanation of that, and then also estimates of potential increases. I mean, I think one of the things, and Chief Lousmith, correct me if this is wrong, but my sense is that we have a general practice of providing interpretation whenever it's needed, and looking for the money, and then sort of monitoring that as we go. But we don't have a practice of denying people interpretation, is my understanding in the district. So I think one of the questions is if we succeed at making sure that everyone knows their rights, will then requests go up, and will then budgets go up, right? So I think there's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing of not exactly knowing, but Chief Lousmith, I'll defer to your expertise on this for sure, because I've been really impressed with the work you've done on it.
Thank you, Commissioner Alexander. And I just say, I'm just I'm the middle person. It's really the staff that are amazing that work behind the scenes on this. So thank you for your question, Commissioner Bogus. So we can only give you information since fiscal year 15-16, that is when the translation and interpretation services moved into this division from the special education department. So there was a shift that fiscal year. At that time, $2.5 million moved into the division's budget as part of the shift to moving it over to translation and interpretation unit. We see a steady increase, probably around 15 to 18% a year on the request for special education related services. Some of that could be there are more students who have families that require translation interpretation. Some of it could be the number of students stays the same, but the length, the assessments and the reports that are done as part of the assessments get longer and longer. So it could be, number of words, it could be number of interpreters. So it's both things that come into play for that increase. As Commissioner Alexander said, each year as we basically have a standing mid-year ask that increases the budget on an annual basis. So currently we're spending $4.3 million a year on translation and interpretation services. I would say the majority of that is for the special education related service requests. We also provide services for general education and meetings, and obviously all of the district-wide interpretation services that we do, particularly around, the student family handbook, the educational placement center enrollment guide, the meals forms, like all of these types of district-wide forms and handbooks are also translated through this department. One of the things I think that's interesting to note is we can't really know what the need is, as Commissioner Alexander said, because we don't know how many students are going to come in and families come in that are in need of services. So we just try to make sure that folks are aware of it. I can give you an example of one of the school-wide events language that's in this current policy, and Commissioner Alexander and I sort of had a good conversation about it. So if you look at that, like generally in the last 4 or 5 years, we have provided about 1,200 requests. We have fulfilled 1,200 requests a year annually for general education meetings. Typically they may include some, but not the school site council at every school. There's also the ELAC, which is the English Learner Council, which sometimes is the same meeting as a school site council and sometimes it's a separate meeting. So when we did the analysis of the policy, we sort of looked at both. Now, typically you're looking at maybe a 2-hour meeting, and you need to have at least 2 interpreters in the language that is needed, because you have to give people breaks, and that's how you keep quality interpretation, is one person needs to be able to take a break while another person jumps in. So you're looking at about, for a 2-hour meeting, maybe an average cost of $200, $250 a meeting. Like, that's just basic. So if we look at the language in the policy that says SSC and that specifically names school site councils, and we also look at, okay, let's assume that each school has an ELAC as well. That's 2 meetings, that's 2 additional meetings a month for all of our schools. And then we looked at how many schools actually hit that 15% threshold, and it's about 89 schools. So you can look and do kind of the math, and we're talking about potentially at the high end, 1,700 more meetings a year. At $200 a meeting is about $700,000 a year. Now, that may not be all covered, right? That isn't the case that we're going to see 1,700 new requests to the translation interpretation unit. Some of those will be met at school sites, but we just try to get an idea of if there was a maximum, that is what it would be. So it just gives us some idea of what we would be planning towards. And then, school sites have staff that get bilingual premiums, and we encourage schools to work with staff who are being paid the bilingual premium in those languages to provide the translation services at schools. Maybe you're in a situation where the staff can't adjust their hours and they need to be paid overtime or extended hours. So that could come out of a school site budget, or the school could say, we don't have it, we're going to request an interpreter. So all of those are a bit of unknowns, but we do track them and keep track of them. And as Commissioner Alexander said, we are not, as a district, ones that just say, oh, we don't have any more money, we're not going to do that service any longer. We provide the services, which is why we have seen an increase since 15-16 in meeting families' needs. So hopefully that answers some of your questions.
No, it does. I appreciate that. But I guess what I'm more concerned about is our strategy and approach going to be successful enough to guarantee that people are able to access the services they need. It seems like the approach we have now is we're going to try to answer all the calls and requests. But I just think from my experience, just knowing that most families aren't going to get to a place where they will request, and that if we don't kind of have the ability to kind of proactively engage people and make things available, it's kind of harder for them to access them. And so I guess I'm just wondering, like, I guess what I'm wondering is how do we figure out like what it would actually cost, not just to continue to grow our service, but for all our services to fully serve all the families in our district, knowing that that's not a cost that we can fully meet, but to know how much that would be so that we can, I guess, be able to analyze if our strategy is going to be successful in helping us to slowly get there, or if we actually need to think of a different strategy to kind of make it happen. Because it seems like we kind of have a two-prong approach where we have, staffing support at the school site where available with additional resources, and then kind of the central office is kind of additional support if those aren't available. Which just seems to kind of create opportunities for gaps and lapses. And I guess I'm just curious about how we think about that broader budget picture, as well as kind of how we continue to grow, if that makes sense.
Sure. So I would say that at the school site level, I believe that the school site staff most of our requests are coming at the school site through school staff. So every family that is scheduled to have an IEP or some special education related is asked whether or not they need translation. I think that's pretty across the board. I can't speak for Chief Robertson, but I'm sure that that is something that they've built into their communication with families. So that definitely happens. We also, we'll look, when we did the prior written notices, like we just can run the data of students whose language, English language learner students and students whose families say they speak another language other than English at their home. So I feel as though we probably are doing a good job about reaching out to the families who speak those languages and letting them know around that type of stuff. We do rely on the schools. I mean, we do stuff centrally, but I will say that we rely on the schools with their partnerships with families to let families know that. And I think the other strategy is in terms of what is the need? Like that is a really good question. We have to make now, particularly with the structural deficit that we are now addressing on our budget balancing plan. We're having to start to make decisions about if we continue to increase are committed to increasing the budget for translation and interpretation. What are some of the trade-offs? What other things are we not going to be able to do while we do that? Those are really hard decisions, but those are the things that we're starting to have to think about. Definitely had to think about in this division, when we have the central office cuts that are coming to the division, we're not reducing translation interpretation at all. So those cuts will come from other areas of the division because we know those are important services. And I don't know, Commissioner Alexander, if you wanted to add anything from that.
Is that okay? I did have one other thought.
Yeah, please, Commissioner Alexander.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the one thing I would add, I agree with everything Chief Smith was saying, and I think the other thing I would add is that in my experience, the best and most welcoming situation for families is when you have bilingual staff at the school site, right? And then that facilitates everything. And then you only really need to access the central office interpretation services when you have a formal meeting like an IEP with specialized technical language, or maybe like a high stakes situation like a suspension or something where you really need to ensure that there's really, really high quality interpretation. And I think and I think you're never going to know, I guess that, like in my opinion, then you're never going to know exactly the exact cost. Like in some ways, like hiring the bilingual staff and then paying them the stipend that they get paid at the school site is in my view the best strategy, because it's cost effective, it's embedded in the school, and then you just layer the central interpretation. The other thing I should mention is the language line. A lot of teachers have mentioned to me how the language line is an incredible resource, right? And it's relatively inexpensive, if I remember correctly, in terms of the cost. I mean, and then if you have a student, if you have like a couple of students who speak a particular language in a school, the teacher or the school secretary or somebody can just get on the phone and get somebody to interpret for that parent. And that people just in the last year, however long it's been since we've been using it, I've heard multiple spontaneous comments from school staff saying how incredibly valuable that is. But again, like those are all like a mix of strategies. So I don't think you're ever going to be able to cost out like what is the total need, because the hiring the 2 professional interpreters to come through for a 2-hour meeting is much more expensive, but it also isn't as necessary if you have the qualified staff at the school site and if you're using language line for certain things. And then people can use their judgment as to when you actually need that more high level service.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Alexander. I do appreciate the additional comments and from Chief Lau-Smith as well. I think the issue for me as a monolingual English speaker is just like the pressure of what happens when you are in a moment when you need to understand something and that isn't available to you, and whether it's because a staff person is out or because someone is new and they don't know a resource is available. And I think for me, I just want to get an understanding if we feel that our current strategies and mixed approach will get us to a place where I feel like this policy is kind of intending to get us to, is where we are guaranteeing these services for all students and families, and it's something that people can expect. And if we aren't able to kind of get there ever through our current structure, then we should actually start a process of re-examining that and reconfiguring how we do it so that maybe there's more staffing at individual school sites to kind of handle this load in a different way than kind of how we're staffing it. So I just want us to just be really critical of, I guess, for staff to be really critical and understand that the policies we put forth, we want to be, I guess, fully implemented. And if you feel like that's something that isn't realistic because of budget constraints or staffing constraints or other constraints, I think for me, that's important to hear, because I think even though this is just a board policy, when I read it, I think also when families and students read it, their expectation is that they will always be able to have access to this. And so I guess just to kind of to lift that up and to kind of figure out how we can embed that in our practices as we move forward and talk about these things more. But that will end my comments. I don't know if there's any additional comments from other commissioners. I'm seeing none. I did actually have one other additional thing I wanted to bring up. I was in my conversations, and I guess I would direct these to you, Commissioner Alexander, a little bit. There were suggestions that I heard that I wanted to bring for you for possible amendment or for your thoughts. Just specifically around adding some additional language to the policy, to additional education code, as well as kind of lifting up the importance of the volunteering of families. I don't know if you have just like general thoughts about kind of making any more amendments or changes at this late state, or kind of adding in kind of additional provisions for possibilities of being open to provide an interpretation. But I just wanted to lift those up in this space and see if you had any thoughts before we took action on the item.
Yeah, no, I'm open. Again, this originated from staff, and I have been collaborating closely with our legal department as well as Chief Lau-Smith on it too. And so I would just say maybe if there are other suggested amendments, they could be given analysis by Chief Lau-Smith and by legal. And they could, because amendments could be brought back at any point. Like, for example, if we move this forward, they could be brought to the full board if there's additional amendments.
Yeah,
I don't know. Or I don't know if it's going to budget. Commissioner Lamb mentioned something about budget. If this is going to budget, that's another place. I didn't recall, but whether it's going back to the full board or to budget, I think wherever the next stop is, it could be amended again.
Yeah, unless Vice President Lamb feels different, I definitely would make a recommendation for us to send it back to the whole board, unless you feel there's a need for it to go to budget.
No, it sounds like because there's already been the analysis, Commissioner Alexander, that's been done. Sorry, I was just looking at the cross-reference in the document. That's why I thought it was gonna be considered to go to Budget and Business Services. But I don't see any issue with it going to the full board.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did a pretty good, like I said, there's more which we'd be happy to share, I think, of in terms of, as Chief Al Smith basically gave it, there's a written version of that as well that we could share.
That'd be great if we could share that as well.
Okay, so I think with that, we'll close out conversation of commissioners. And we will, with, I think, unanimous support, move this forward to the whole board with a positive recommendation.
Commissioner, I believe you need a formal motion and a second.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's do that.
Sorry to interrupt.
I can move, since I had proposed this. I'll move that we move it forward to the full board with positive recommendation with the amendments proposed, or the amended version, let's say.
I'll second. Sorry, I cut you off, Commissioner Alexander.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay, do we need to take a vote? Are we good with unanimous consent? Okay.
Unanimous consent's fine.
We consent. Let's move to the last item on our agenda. And I believe we have staff presenting.
Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Viva Mogi. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning for the district. Sorry, I do present at the city too, so I get a little confused. Today we are discussing just the overall parameters and around the California Community School Grant that has not been issued yet, but has been announced, I think late last year, in regards to the $3 billion grant that the state legislators had passed during the budget cycle of 2020 and 2021. The state, as you know, has not released the grant application yet, but since the announcement, San Francisco Unified School District Superintendent has signed on to a letter with the California Teachers Associations and Oakland School District and LAUSD to be able to support the application that's coming through, and requested to the state superintendent to clarify some of the application process to the public. And so, you know, we, even though the application has not been out yet, we have been showing our support to be able to apply for the grant when it is available. We are committed to applying for this grant to maximize the number of schools that would qualify, as we know that this is a high interest in the school communities. The best thing for us to be able to, what we will need is that we will have a team that will be supporting the school sites to apply the community school grant. So Deputy Superintendent Ford Morthal and Deputy Superintendent Lee are going to assess based on the demand that does come in, and to see which capacity to identify the appropriate staff for this project, and will convene and launch a planning group comprised of a cross section of stakeholders. We have, as the public may not know, but we have applied for many federal, state grants that have been around community schools in regard, and so we have been a recipient of the Mission Promise Neighborhood. We have applied for the San Francisco Promise Neighborhood grant, and we were also a recipient of the SIG grant, that is a federal California Department of Education grant as well in the past. And so these all benefit schools and neighborhoods that have shown some need in terms and to be able to lean towards a community school model. And so this isn't our first this isn't the first time we are applying for this grant, but we have been, this will be the first time the state will be issuing a grant, and we have not seen what the application looks like, but we have had similar experiences, including myself, to lead a process to apply for these type of grants. And so we hope that, you know, both the commissioners and also the public are aware that, you know, we'll be prepared when the application comes out. Unfortunately, because we're not sure exactly what the application says, we cannot currently identify which school sites would be applying. And also we have been waiting for the right time to ask, we know school sites are very much engaged, but until we see the application, we're going to be just holding on tight until we start that process right now.
Thank you so much for that. And I think if there's no clarifying questions from commissioners, we'll go to public comment and we will provide 1 minute per commenter.
If you'd like to speak to this item, can you please raise your hand? Can I have that interpreted, please?
Buenas tardes, por favor levante su mano si desea añadir un comentario público con relación a este rubro. Gracias.
大家好，而家係公眾發表意見環節。如果你需要發言，麻煩你請舉手。多謝你。
Leslie?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Hu. I'm the Secretary of United Educators of San Francisco. I'm really excited to hear that SFUSD is applying for this. And as a representative of UESF, we have actually been pushing for this application for these critical services for our communities. And we actually have a team ready to stand by to support the application process. Somebody from LEAD has volunteered to lead this process along with several veteran principals, educators, students, and families. And we would love to work in partnership to be able to apply for this critical application. I've been in contact with California Teachers Association and have some critical information that we can use to plan ahead before the request for application comes out at the end of February. And I urge that we work in partnership with all of our stakeholders to be able to move this forward. Thank you.
That's it, Commissioner.
Okay, were there any comments from other commissioners? Yeah, Commissioner Alexander.
Yeah, so I just would love to get some clarity from staff about how they are collaborating with Leslie, who just spoke, because there was an email that I received on January 25th that I had forwarded to the superintendent. I haven't gotten a response yet back. It sounds like they already have a team assembled, and I know that Leslie is a really highly regarded community schools coordinator in this work and has been involved in this work at the city level, at the state level. I mean, if anyone should be coordinating this grant process in SFUSD, it's Leslie Hu. And so it concerns me that it seems like there's a different process that's happening according to what Ms. Mogi just said. I don't know. I'm a little confused. So I just would like some clarity from staff as to what is going on and what's and are you collaborating with the Leslie's group or not?
Let me, if I could just respond what response I got to that, and then I would love for staff to respond as well, Commissioner Alexander. So I would just say from what I heard for staff is that they are taking this process kind of in the way that they handle traditional grant processes and kind of going to go through their kind of internal structures and internal staff to kind of lead the process. And that kind of after that process starts, after it is released, then they will actually kind of be reaching out and collaborating with broader folks within the community. But I will let staff clarify or correct anything that I might have misrepresented. But that is my understanding of the approach that the district has taken.
I also saw that Melly had unmuted herself, so I don't know if you want to chime in, or I can also share some background as well.
Sure. Just to kind of give you some background, Commissioner Alexander and Commissioner Bogus. I'm trying to even remember my timing, but I personally have worked very closely with Leslie, who on the previous community schools application that we submitted, I want to say spring 2020, although it all starts blending in my mind. I know we worked together and we weren't successful in that application. And some of, I think, what Commissioner Bogus is is referencing is once we get the application, we sort of have to do the calculation of what it usually, oftentimes, and hopefully it's different. Sometimes eligibility is tied to free and reduced and enrollment. And so we run the data and sort of identify which of the schools are eligible to run. And then we work, at least the way that we worked it last time is Jason, Hanan, myself, Leslie, and others worked closely with the principals to design sort of what their side of the application would be. So it, depending on what the application looks like, the collaboration sometimes looks a little bit different. But, and I also know that I believe Commissioner Bogus, you're on at the RISE, the SF RISE, I want to make sure I'm saying it the right way, where Leslie's also part of that. Chief Hogendijk is on that. And I know that at those meetings, which I don't go to, but I know Chief Hogendijk goes to, there's a lot of collaboration and conversations happening. So I think we're just covering a lot of bases this way, and appreciate that Leslie just keeps telling us as a cheerleader that she's out there and ready to assist. So we appreciate that continual messaging.
Commissioner Alexander, I don't know if you have additional comments.
Yeah, I guess that concerns me, honestly. So I just want to say, I mean, I feel like when we have, I mean, I think this is this sort of top-down process of doing this kind of thing, which without relying on the people that are deeply embedded in our schools doing the work is really concerning to me. I mean, it sounds like from what Leslie's saying, sounds like she actually has a team of people, including, sounds like people from LEAD, within central office, veteran principals. So it's not just about Leslie. I think it's actually about engaging with the people that are already passionate about this and doing the work. So that's one thing. I don't think it should be.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't mean to sound that way, and maybe that's how I described it. I mean, we are working with the team, like we worked with principals last time, we worked with LEAD and things like that. What I meant was the data analysis is just something we do at the beginning, just because that is just the data analysis and we can get that done quickly. And then we know which schools we need to reach out as part of the team. So I apologize if I wasn't clear. However, that said, I think there's always a way, you know, it looked really different in a pandemic than it's going to look now, because that was in 2020. And we know that Leslie's got a group on the ground and we will be working with them as well. So when I said Leslie, I think I was thinking of the greater Leslie. So I apologize for not being clear, but thank you.
No.
I appreciate that feedback though, because we.
Well, I wasn't really. Sorry, Chief Lessmith, I didn't mean to critique your comments at all. I was kind of saying that general. I guess my concern is more, and it sounds like last time this happened, I guess my concern is the sort of waiting. Also, when you have energy and initiative coming from the bottom up, it feels like we should capitalize on that, especially when they're willing to do the work. And so I guess that's another thing I've heard, and I've talked to several folks outside the SFUSD about this. Mm-hmm. I got a call from someone at the state level who said, you know, why isn't SFUSD working on your application yet? And it's not that the application is out yet, but we could even be influencing how the application looks. We could be, I mean, if we're going to lead on this, we don't need to wait until we see what the application is like. We're one of the leading districts in the state. Somebody at the state level told me that we could be getting at least $20 million from this grant. This could be a major initiative within SFUSD. So I guess I just would love us to do two things. One is to be really proactive about this, and using our contacts at the state level to make sure the application reflects the vision of community schools as we see it, because we have a track record of this too, as you've pointed out, Chief Lessmith. I mean, we've done that, and Ms. Mogi too, like we've done this work. And so I think we don't need to wait until the application comes out, is number one. And number two, just again, folks on the ground are ready to do work, so I just want to make sure, sometimes we hear this on the board of like, oh, folks in central office are really overwhelmed. Now we have folks who work at school sites who are actually ready to volunteer their time to work on this. I don't want to lose that momentum. So that's all I'm saying. I hope somebody's like reaching back out. I hadn't gotten a response to that email. I just hope somebody's reaching out to Leslie, is in conversation with her, got that group convened. And again, we don't have to write the exact application yet, but we could get the ball rolling and kind of be ready. And I'm sure that's on a list somewhere. So I guess I just want to encourage us to prioritize it.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Alexander. And I see that Diva wanted to respond. Did you want to?
Yeah, I think we are, we will follow up, and we have iterated that we have strong interest, and it is true we haven't convened a group yet. You know, the lead member that is working, Jason Hanan, is someone that, you know, both deputy superintendents have asked to do. And so these are conversations that are all happening from the ground up and also from, you know, from leadership as well, to be able to make sure that we're connecting the dots with what's going on. Additionally, as mentioned, the 2020 application, we did not also receive, we were not a recipient of it. And we were also not a recipient of the SF Promise Grant that was from the federal California state of, you know, California Department of Education. And a lot of oftentimes, like, we hear two feedbacks, like, while it's very, you know, it's something that they really want. And we also consistently hear that the site leaders are overwhelmed as well. And so, you know, we do try to make sure that we find a balance that as long as they qualify, that we would want them to really get started on the work. Again, we haven't seen the application. So we do, like Chief Lyle Smith did say, we have to do an analysis that we don't just ask as many schools to try to apply if they don't qualify. So this is like a very chicken and egg and a little bit of a tough situation. And we will be working in the school sites that we think that might be able to qualify. They are very much engaged, but until we see the application, as Commissioner Bogus said, we also really want to be mindful of everyone's time to not set, you know, any kind of expectations that they will, one, be the school that they could apply for, and then to tell them that they won't be able to because they don't qualify. And we won't just be able to know until the application comes out. And so I will have staff, or Jason and I will connecting tomorrow, and we'll see if we can just like start engaging. At the same time, we also have to set clear expectations as well, because this will be a very competitive grant.
Thank you for that. I would just like to add, I think too, just from the committee level, I feel a lot of urgency for us to monitor this at a committee level. And so I think this is going to be an item that I'm going to kind of want to make a standing item until we either submit an application and get money, or we submit an application and don't get money, or something else happens, just so that there's clear dialogue and communication with the public and community. I definitely would like for us at our next meeting to agendize some time to talk about the process with which we use to kind of go after these grants and funds, and just to kind of have more transparency about that, just so that we can, as a board, see if we're doing enough to ensure we're getting every dollar we can through these processes to support our school sites. So I'll work with staff to agendize that and figure out how we can have a report back on that. I would also, I think, recommend for members of the public and the school community with thoughts and ideas about what we should be doing right now, to send them to me and Commissioner Alexander, and I would volunteer other commissioners too, so that we're able to relay that directly to the superintendent, because in a lot of ways, he's the person who is responsible for our kind of success in this endeavor or not. And so I think as staff kind of prepares and gets ready to collaborate with community, we definitely can be a vehicle to send messages and relay things directly to the top of leadership. And so I definitely will volunteer my email for that. A lot of people already do, so please feel free to add to that. I don't know if there's any additional comments from staff, Chief Smith?
Yeah, sorry. And
Please.
I do, may I just say one more thing, and thank you for reminding me of this, Commissioner Alexander, is we actually did a pretty robust community collaborative process to create the Community Schools Toolkit. We met many of the members that are on the RISE SF were also part of the collaborative group. There was some work with the Close the Gap folks, Efrain and Leslie, and a lot of folks to create this Community Schools Toolkit, also with the SF Beacon initiative, to sort of meld all the different ways that we think about community schools at SFUSD, because I do think there's sort of the foundational idea of a community school, which is sort of a national model. There's a Beacon model, and then there is a lot of learning that has happened at school sites about how they've implemented through the different grants and through the Beacon model. And so that toolkit is sort of what we were intending to, because that was created out of a collaborative process, as sort of some of the foundational ideas of how we would design the application. So I guess to the point that I just want to say there has been pre-work maybe not in the last year, but previously, because this has been a pretty iterative process since we've had these. And that's definitely something that we're going to go back to with the group. We've done some of these presentations and worked together with the RISE SF folks. So also realizing that like it's hard. Sometimes we'll have these things, but we're not saying them over again. And then it can look one way or another. So I just also wanted to name that has been work in the past that we've done as well, leading up to some of the new work that we will be doing, or I don't know, the next iteration, however you want to say it. So thank you for allowing me to speak again.
Thank you so much for that additional context. I think it provides a lot of insight. Vice President Lamb.
I'm curious right now with remind me please, with Governor Newsom and the level of commitment for this community school model. Is it multi-year, fixed forever, or is it a short-term initiative?
It is a 5-year until 2027. It will be, the $3 billion is being kind of allocated across the time frame of that time frame. Additionally, I think legislators are proposing additional budgetary items. State legislators are through this budget cycle, but we haven't seen an actual. Obviously, the legislative cycle has just begun, and so we haven't seen any shifts at this time. But the current $3 billion is up to year 2027.
So it's a 5-year commitment. Is that our understanding? Or will it be in cohorts or cycles? Are we just not clear yet because the application hasn't been released?
Oh, so the timeline has been written. Sorry, I can just pull it up very quickly because I was just looking at it today. It will, it's divvied up for pre-planning work, which was the one that Chief Lousmith did mention from last year, and then which was about $500 million that was allocated. And then this, the majority of the term that is going to be doing will be happening between 2022 to 2026. And then they'll have an additional kind of like a transition period to be able to, move on from receiving this grant to move, like similar to the Promise Neighborhood Grant, it does have an end term. And then they hope that either the city itself or other matching funds can be able to support the funds moving forward.
Thank you. I think that's what's really important, right? Because as we're looking at multi-year projections, 3 to 5 years out, absolutely community schools is an important value. But I think it is like Promise, like so many of the state and federal initiatives, really looking at how are we, if we're going to invest and we get the award, first of all, we get the award, but really look at intentionally, essentially from year one, building out that sustainability, because what we've seen time and time again from 20 years of initiatives is that when there's not that sustainable funding, that's a tremendous loss at the school sites or to the students directly, to staff and families. So that's just something that, as the planning process goes on, and if we are awarded, that's just my ask as part of that sustainable planning.
Second that. I mean, I just want to also, I think whenever community schools come up, I just can't highlight how important I think they are. I think in a lot of ways, the idea of community schools is really a solution to a lot of the gaps that we see in our school district when we look at success rates or discipline rates, or the students and communities that are historically left behind. And I'm really hopeful that this opportunity and others like it will really help us get a springboard to ensure that all of our schools are community schools and have additional base staffing and funding to provide additional supports, resources, higher level of rigor in all of our classes and supports for students to be successful. So I'm really excited as we go down this adventure and as we appropriately budget for what we need to do to make sure we're serving all students and families. Vice President Lamb.
Sorry, your comment sparked me to also really the importance around community school models and also, how is that tying back to the metrics of student learning and outcomes? Like, I think that is absolutely, for me, really important to center because, as a former Healthy Start coordinator, 21st Century Learning Community Center director, that was what was really important you know, how are we measuring those progress and those outcomes from our students? So I'm excited as we go through this process to really have that also be front and center of the discussion. So sustainability, but also the progress and growth and measurements that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to our students.
Thank you so much, Vice President Lam. I think that will be our final comments on this. Thank you so much to staff for all your hard work and appreciation for all that you're doing and answering our hard questions. And I think with that, we will adjourn our rules meeting today. Thank you everyone so much for coming out and have a great evening.
You too.
Thanks, Chair Boga.